This is a true story shared by a participant on a Sea Monsters forum in 2017. The dimly lit bar in a small Norwegian fishing town hummed with the usual murmur of conversation, the occasional clink of beer glasses, and the smell of salt carried in from the docks. Lars and Svein sat in their usual corner, sharing a bottle of beer after another long day at sea. Their rugged faces, marked by years of battling the North Sea, showed skepticism as they listened to their friend Henrik recount a tale he had told many times before. "I'm telling you," Henrik insisted, leaning closer over the wooden table, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw something out there, bigger than any whale. The water turned black around my boat. And the tentacles? They were as thick as the mast of a ship." Lars scoffed, shaking his head. "You've had too much aquavit again, Henrik. The sea plays tricks on you when you're alone out there." Henrik slammed his glass down, making the table tremble. "I know what I saw. You think I'd make this up?" His eyes darted around the bar as if making sure no one else was listening. "It was the Kraken. Lars, the real thing." Svein chuckled and took another sip of his beer. "And I suppose it waved at you too?" Henrik didn't laugh. He leaned back and crossed his arms. "Believe what you want, but mark my words. The Kraken is real. And if you had been in my boat that night, you'd never go back out there again." Lars and Svein exchanged a glance. There was something about Henrik's tone this time, a conviction in his voice that sent a slight chill down their spines. "All right," Lars finally said, a playful smirk forming on his lips. "Then let's prove it. If you're so sure, Henrik, we'll go out there ourselves. We'll sail out to the deep and see if your Kraken is real or just another old sailor's tale." Henrik scoffed. "You wouldn't last a night." "Then we'll prove you wrong," Svein added, grinning at Lars. "We'll take the boat and head further than we ever have before. If the Kraken is out there, we'll find it." Henrik shook his head, chuckling darkly. "I hope you know what you're getting yourselves into." Lars raised his glass. "To adventure, then. Let's find this Kraken of yours." They clinked their glasses together, but in the back of their minds, a lingering doubt remained. Was Henrik just telling another tall tale? Or had he truly seen something that night out in the endless, dark waters? Neither of them knew yet, but soon enough, they would find out. The morning air was crisp as Lars and Svein stood at the dock, their breath visible in the cold breeze rolling in from the sea. Their small fishing boat, Havmone, bobbed gently in the harbor, waiting for them to decide whether they truly intended to go through with this. "You know," Svein said as he adjusted the straps of his weathered oilskin jacket, "this might be the stupidest idea we've ever had." Lars chuckled, checking the ropes securing their gear. "Probably. But if Henrik won't stop talking about the Kraken, we might as well put an end to it." They had spent the evening after the bar carefully planning the trip. Henrik had reluctantly given them rough coordinates where he claimed to have encountered the beast, farther out than most fishermen dared to go. It was a place where the ocean floor dropped into a dark abyss, a place whispered about by the oldest men in town. Some called it cursed, others just called it suicide. Svein tossed a heavy sack of provisions onto the deck. "We've got food and water for a few days, extra fuel, and the spare radio. If we don't see anything after 2 nights, we're heading back." Lars nodded in agreement. He wasn't reckless. He knew the dangers of the open sea. But something about Henrik's story, the way his voice had trembled, made him want to see for himself. A voice called from the dock. "You're really doing this?" They turned to see Henrik standing there, arms crossed, a look of disapproval on his face. "You think this is some kind of joke?" Henrik continued. "The sea isn't a game, and what's out there, it isn't something you want to find." Lars smirked, stepping onto the boat. "Then why are you so afraid of us proving you wrong?" Henrik sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "It's not about proving me wrong, Lars. It's about making sure you come back." Svein patted Henrik on the shoulder. "Relax, old friend. We'll be back in a couple of days. If we don't find your monster, you owe us drinks for a month." Henrik didn't laugh. He just shook his head and muttered, "I hope you do come back." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Lars and Svein exchanged a glance. There was something unsettling about Henrik's warning, but neither of them wanted to admit it. Svein took his place at the helm, while Lars untied the last mooring rope. With a deep hum, the boat's engine roared to life, and Havmone pulled away from the dock, gliding toward the endless horizon. As they left the safety of the harbor, the sun barely rising over the distant mountains, neither of them realized that their journey had already begun, and there would be no turning back. The salty wind lashed against their faces as Havmona cut through the choppy waters, its engine humming steadily beneath them. Lars stood near the bow, hands in the pockets of his thick coat, scanning the horizon. Svein was at the helm, his eyes fixed on the compass, occasionally adjusting their course. The town had long disappeared from view, leaving them alone with the sea and sky. It was an odd feeling, one that both men had experienced countless times as fishermen, yet today there was a different weight to it. "So, what do you actually expect to find out here?" Svein asked, breaking the silence. Lars smirked, leaning against the railing. "Nothing. And that's exactly what I want to find. Once we come back empty-handed, Henrik will have to admit he was seeing things." Svein shook his head. "And if we do see something?" Lars chuckled. "Then we turn around and pretend we didn't." The ocean stretched endlessly before them, its deep blue depths concealing secrets neither of them wanted to think about. They had set their course for the coordinates Henrik had given them, an area known for its treacherous currents and uncharted trenches. Few fishermen ever dared to go that far. The sea was unpredictable, and they weren't keen on becoming another lost vessel. The day passed in steady silence, the occasional chatter between them growing scarce as the reality of their expedition settled in. It wasn't long before they reached waters that neither had ever fished before. The waves were rougher here, as if the ocean itself was warning them. By late afternoon, the sky had begun to change. Dark clouds gathered in the distance, creeping toward them with unsettling speed. Svein glanced at Lars. "That storm looks bad." Lars frowned. It wasn't in the forecast. Svein adjusted the throttle, slowing their speed. "Doesn't matter. We'll have to ride it out if it catches us." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the first gusts of strong wind rocked the boat. The waters grew restless, swelling beneath them like a beast waking from its slumber. Lars tightened his grip on the railing. "I don't like this." The storm was coming faster than expected. The wind howled, carrying with it the distant growl of thunder. Svein gritted his teeth and turned the boat slightly east, trying to navigate around the worst of it. But the ocean had other plans. A wave, larger than any they had seen all day, rose ahead of them, crashing down with a force that sent Havmona tilting dangerously to one side. Svein swore, gripping the wheel. "Hold on." The boat rocked violently as rain began to pour, drenching them in seconds. The sky had turned an angry shade of gray, and the sea below matched its fury. Lars grabbed onto a metal bar, his knuckles white. This isn't normal. The waves tossed them like a toy, dragging them farther from their intended course. The compass spun wildly, and the GPS flickered in protest. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the storm began to ease. The wind softened, the rain turned to a drizzle, and the sea, though restless, no longer threatened to capsize them. Svein exhaled heavily, wiping seawater from his face. That was too fast. Storms don't just come and go like that. Lars didn't respond. He was staring out into the distance, his expression unreadable. Svein followed his gaze. The ocean ahead was eerily calm, too calm. And there, in the far distance, barely visible against the misty horizon, was something neither of them had expected. A shape. Dark, massive, and unmoving. Lars swallowed hard. "That's not an island, is it?" Svein gripped the wheel tighter, his throat dry. No, it wasn't. The mist clung to the water like a thick shroud, making it difficult to judge distances. Lars and Svein stood motionless, eyes locked on the dark shape in the distance. It was too large to be a shipwreck, too unmoving to be a drifting mass of debris. The ocean around it was unnaturally still, a stark contrast to the raging storm that had just thrown them off course. Svein swallowed hard. "We need to check the map." Lars nodded, stepping inside the small cabin, dripping seawater onto the wooden floor. He yanked open the waterproof case where their maps were stored and unrolled one across the table. His finger traced their intended route, then the approximate area where the storm had tossed them. "There shouldn't be anything here," he muttered. Svein leaned in, his brow furrowed. No islands, no land, nothing. Lars looked up at him. "Then what the hell is that?" Outside, the shape loomed closer. As the mist shifted, revealing more of it, they realized it was an island, though unlike any they had ever seen. Jagged black rocks lined the shore, jutting out at sharp angles, like the ribcage of some long-dead creature. No trees, no signs of life, just stone and darkness. Svein exhaled. We need to stop. Lars shot him a look. Are you serious? We can't navigate in the dark, and we don't know how far off course we are. If we keep going blind, we might hit something worse. Lars hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to turn the boat around and get as far away from this place as possible. But Svein was right. They needed to regroup, get their bearings, and wait for daylight. With a heavy sigh, Lars nodded. Fine. But we stay on the boat. Svein didn't argue. He carefully steered Havmon toward the calmer waters near the island's shore, avoiding the sharp rocks. They dropped anchor in a relatively stable area where the waves weren't as fierce. As night fell, an uneasy silence settled over them. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the hull. Inside the cabin, they sat opposite each other, eating what little food they had left from their provisions. Lars poked at a piece of dried fish, his appetite gone. Svein exhaled, leaning back. You know, if we had gone missing in that storm, Henrik would have had a field day. Lars smirked despite himself. Yeah, he'd be telling the whole town how we got eaten by the Kraken. Svein chuckled, shaking his head. It's funny, isn't it? We came all this way to prove him wrong, and now we're stranded on some unmarked island in the middle of nowhere. Lars's smirk faded as he glanced out the cabin window, back toward the looming mass of land. Something about this place didn't sit right. He just didn't know why yet. The night was long and restless. Though they had planned to stay on the boat, neither Lars nor Svein could sleep. The island loomed over them in the darkness, and the mist that had carried them here refused to dissipate. It felt unnatural, as if the air itself resisted their presence. Lars lay in his bunk, staring at the wooden ceiling, listening to the rhythmic rocking of Havmon. Every now and then, he swore he heard something, faint sounds beyond the water's movement. A low, almost imperceptible hum. Svein turned over in his own bunk. You hear that? Lars hesitated. I don't know, maybe it's just the wind. Svein sat up. There is no wind. Silence. Lars pulled his blanket off and sat up as well, rubbing his face. His nerves were raw. Maybe it was just exhaustion playing tricks on them. Maybe they were imagining things. But then it happened again. A sound just beneath the surface of perception. Not the moan of shifting tides or the call of distant seabirds. Something else. A deep, resonant vibration, as if the sea itself was breathing. Lars and Svein exchanged uneasy glances. We need to go on land, Svein said suddenly. Lars narrowed his eyes. Are you crazy? We can't just sit here all night. Something's off about this place, and I want to know what. Lars hesitated. Every instinct in his body told him to stay on the boat. But Svein was right. If they stayed put, they'd just keep spiraling into paranoia. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just the echoes of waves against the rock formations. With a reluctant nod, Lars grabbed a flashlight and climbed out onto the deck. Svein followed, securing the rope ladder over the side. The rowboat they had brought was still tied to the stern, bobbing gently in the water. They lowered themselves into it and rowed toward shore. The beach was made of smooth black pebbles that crunched beneath their boots. The mist was thinner here, but the island was still eerily silent. No wind, no insects, no birds. Just the two of them and the vast nothingness. Svein knelt down and picked up a stone. Volcanic rock, he murmured. This island must have been formed from an eruption ages ago. Lars scanned the landscape with his flashlight. Beyond the shore, the island sloped upward into a series of jagged cliffs. The terrain was uneven, almost unnatural, as if something had violently torn through it long ago. Svein exhaled. All right, let's have a look around. Lars sighed. Just for a few minutes. They walked further inland, careful to watch their step on the uneven ground. Then they found something that made them stop in their tracks. A single, massive indentation in the rocky soil, like the imprint of a tentacle. Lars and Svein stood frozen, staring at the massive imprint in the rocky soil. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. Nearly 5 meters across, the indentation was deep, as if something impossibly heavy had pressed into the ground and then vanished. The edges of the mark were uneven, curling into long, curved grooves, like the suction marks of a tentacle. Lars swallowed hard. Tell me I'm imagining things. Svein crouched beside the imprint, running his fingers over the edges. The rock was cracked and brittle, as if whatever had made this mark had crushed the ground with immense force. He exhaled sharply. Lars, this isn't natural. This looks like something alive did it. Lars's stomach twisted. He wanted to dismiss the thought, to rationalize it as some geological phenomenon, an old volcanic scar, an erosion pattern. But deep down, he knew the truth. Svein stood up, brushing off his hands. It's real, Lars. Henrik wasn't lying. Lars ran a hand through his damp hair. This doesn't make sense. If something that big was moving around out here, people would have seen it. Maybe they have, Svein said grimly. A chill ran down Lars's spine. They both turned their eyes toward the dark cliffs ahead. The mist swirled around the jagged rock formations, and for a moment, it almost looked like something was shifting within it. A trick of the light, or something watching them. Svein exhaled. We should get back to the boat. Lars didn't argue. They turned on their heels and hurried back toward the shore. The stillness of the island pressed down on them, making every crunch of their boots sound deafeningly loud. As they reached the beach, Svein suddenly stopped and pointed toward the water. The rowboat was still there, bobbing in the gentle tide. But something was wrong. The rope securing it to the shore was frayed. Not cut cleanly, but shredded, like something had gnawed or dragged its way through the fibers. Lars's pulse pounded in his ears. That wasn't like that before. Svein grabbed the remaining rope and pulled the boat closer. We're leaving. Now. They jumped into the rowboat and paddled furiously back to Havmen. The water beneath them was calm. Too calm. Not a single ripple aside from the ones they made themselves. As they climbed back aboard their fishing boat, Lars cast one last glance at the island. The mist had thickened again, curling like fingers around the cliffs. For the first time in his life, he felt truly small. They had come here seeking the Kraken as a joke, but something had already found them. Back on Havmona, Lars and Svein stood silently on the deck, watching the island fade into the mist. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The weight of what they had seen, the unnatural imprint, the shredded rope, the eerie stillness, sat heavy between them. Lars finally exhaled and rubbed his face. All right, he said. Let's be rational. That mark on the ground, maybe it was an old rock formation that got eroded by the tide. Svein shot him a look. And the rope? What, did the tide chew through it? Lars had no answer. He leaned against the railing and stared down into the water. It was dark, impossibly dark. Though the surface was still, something about it unsettled him. It felt like the ocean was watching them. Svein was busy checking the boat's condition. The storm had left Havmona battered but intact. Some of the fishing gear had come loose, but nothing serious was damaged. Lars turned back to his friend. What do we do now? Svein sighed. We came out here to prove Henrik was full of nonsense, but I don't think we can say that anymore. Lars hesitated before nodding. So what? We keep looking? Svein was quiet for a moment. Then, with a firm nod, he said, We didn't come all this way just to turn back. Lars felt a mix of relief and dread. Part of him wanted to leave, to pretend they had never seen that mark on the island. But another part, the same part that had made him agree to this journey in the first place, needed to know the truth. They checked their supplies. They had enough food and water for several more days. The engines were still running fine. There was no reason to turn back yet. As night began to fall, they set a course further into the open sea, deeper into the waters where legends of the Kraken had been whispered for generations. The sky turned a deep indigo, the stars emerging one by one. The ocean stretched endlessly around them, black and still. Then, just past midnight, the first ripple broke the surface. Svein was the first to notice. He leaned over the railing, frowning. Did you see that? Lars moved to his side. What? A second ripple, then another. The water shifted, just slightly, not like a wave, not like the usual movement of the sea. It was something else. Something beneath them was stirring. Lars's throat went dry. Maybe it's a whale. Svein didn't look convinced. Then why is it circling us? Lars felt his stomach drop. He hadn't noticed it at first, but now he saw. The ripples weren't random. They moved in a slow, deliberate arc around the boat. Something was down there, and it knew they were here. The night air grew heavy as Lars and Svein stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the shifting water around Havmona. The ocean, so calm just moments ago, now carried an eerie unease. The ripples, too large for fish, too calculated for simple currents, circled them like a silent predator. Lars swallowed hard. You think it's shut up? Svein's voice was barely above a whisper. He gripped the railing, his knuckles white. His eyes darted across the black water, searching. Another ripple. Closer this time. Lars grabbed the flashlight from the cabin and clicked it on. The bright beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the sea. At first, there was nothing, just endless black waves stretching into the void. Then, for the briefest moment, the light caught something beneath the surface. A shadow. Massive. It moved quickly, too quickly for Lars to fully comprehend its shape. But his gut told him one thing. It was bigger than the boat. His breath hitched. Svein? I saw it. Lars swept the light across the water again, but whatever had been there was gone. Only the slow, deliberate ripples remained. Svein grabbed an oar and dipped it into the water, testing the depth. It disappeared into the blackness with no resistance. It's deep here, deeper than it should be. Lars clenched his jaw. We need to go. Svein hesitated, then nodded. He rushed to the controls and started the engine. The hum of the motor echoed across the still water. They turned the boat, setting a course away from the strange disturbance. For a moment, nothing happened. The ripples faded, the sea returned to its deceptive calm. Then Havmone lurched. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the current. Something had pushed them. Lars lost his balance, gripping the side of the boat as Svein fought the wheel. The engine roared, but the boat struggled as if caught in an invisible grip. Then came the sound, a deep guttural groan from below. Not a whale, not anything Lars had ever heard before. It was ancient, primal, and impossibly vast. The water beneath them swelled, lifting Havmone ever so slightly before releasing it. The boat wobbled, then steadied. Silence. The ocean was still again. No ripples, no movement. But they weren't fools. Lars and Svein locked eyes, their unspoken agreement clear. They weren't alone. Something had found them. And it was still down there, watching, waiting. The next few hours passed in a tense, suffocating silence. Lars and Svein sat in the small cabin of Havmone, their eyes darting nervously between the ocean and each other. Every creak of the boat, every whisper of the wind seemed amplified. The terrifying growl from beneath the waves echoed in their minds, the noise still fresh, still hanging in the air. Svein stood by the window, staring out into the darkness. His breath fogged up the glass, and he wiped it clean, peering into the vast, empty sea. It's like it knows where we are, he muttered. Lars ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his nerves. This isn't normal. We shouldn't be out here. Svein turned, his face grim. You don't think I know that? His voice was hard, but there was an edge of doubt underneath it. We're in it now. If we turn back, it might come after us. Lars clenched his jaw. The idea of facing whatever was out there, whatever Henrik had been talking about, was too much. But the thought of fleeing and leaving it behind, of letting it follow them back home, was equally unbearable. I don't care if it comes after us, Lars said, finally. We go back to shore. We'll get help. We're not built for this. None of this makes sense. Svein's eyes softened for a moment, but then a wave of fear seemed to wash over him, and he turned back to the window. We can't outrun it. We don't even know what it is. The boat suddenly lurched again, the engine sputtering as if something was pulling on the hull. Lars barely had time to react before Svein slammed the throttle into reverse, but it was too late. Havmone was no longer moving away from the disturbance. It was being drawn toward it. With a wrenching sound, the boat scraped against something hard beneath the water, and Svein scrambled to turn the wheel. Lars rushed to the edge of the boat, his heart pounding. What the hell? In the dim light, something enormous rose from the depths. It wasn't just a shadow. It was massive, with great curling arms that seemed to stretch far and wide, wrapping around the boat like a living entity. It looked like a giant squid. No, a colossal octopus, its limbs nearly as long as the boat itself. The suction cups on its tentacles glinted in the moonlight. Its body was monstrous, dark, and impossibly vast, dwarfing Havmone in size. Lars felt a chill run down his spine as the creature's eyes, huge, unblinking, and ancient, fixed on them. It felt as though the creature could see straight into their souls, and in that moment, Lars realized Henrik hadn't been lying. The Kraken was real. It's real, Lars whispered, his voice barely audible. Svein slammed the throttle forward, trying to break free, but the Kraken's limbs tightened, pulling the boat closer, almost dragging them into the depths. The boat groaned under the pressure, the hull scraping against the creature's writhing body. "Hold on!" Svein shouted. "Get the harpoon! Now!" But Lars was too stunned, too terrified to move. The boat was at the mercy of the beast. Every attempt to escape seemed to only draw them closer to the thing's massive, suffocating embrace. A tentacle shot out suddenly, smashing against the boat with a deafening crack. The force of the impact sent Lars crashing to the floor, his head spinning. He barely had time to react before Svein yanked him up by the arm. "Get up! We need to fight back!" Svein yelled, urgency in his voice. Lars could barely comprehend the situation, but he instinctively grabbed the harpoon gun and aimed it at the creature's writhing mass. His hands shook as he pulled the trigger. The harpoon shot out, striking one of the Kraken's massive arms. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a terrifying roar, the creature recoiled, its tentacle jerking violently as it tried to free itself. But it was only a brief distraction. The Kraken's eyes narrowed, and with a chilling growl, the ocean around them erupted in a frenzy of movement. The sea seemed to boil as the creature prepared for the final strike. Lars and Svein had no choice but to prepare for the fight of their lives, not knowing if they would survive to tell anyone about what they had witnessed. The boat rocked violently as the Kraken's immense tentacles thrashed against the hull. Waves of water surged over the deck, flooding the small boat in seconds. Lars struggled to keep his footing as he gripped the harpoon gun, his heart racing, his mind clouded with panic. Svein, his face ashen, shouted over the roar of the storm, "We need to get away from it. We can't fight it head-on." But the Kraken had other plans. With a bone-rattling screech, one of its tentacles shot forward, slamming into the side of Havmone. The impact sent the boat lurching violently to one side, and Lars was thrown to the ground, the harpoon gun skidding across the deck. Svein was on his feet in an instant, grabbing Lars by the arm and dragging him toward the stern. "We need to steer the boat away from it. Now!" Lars scrambled to his feet, his body aching from the fall. He had no idea how they were going to escape this nightmare. The Kraken wasn't just some ancient sea creature. It was a force of nature, a living disaster that seemed to have no end. He reached for the wheel, but as soon as his hands touched it, another tentacle shot up from the depths, curling around the boat's side with terrifying strength. It twisted and turned, cracking the wood beneath their feet. The sound of splintering wood filled the air, and Lars felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. They were trapped. "Help me!" Svein yelled, struggling to free the boat from the Kraken's grasp. But no matter how hard they fought, the creature's grip tightened. Lars's mind raced. They had no weapons, no way of defeating such a massive beast. But they had one thing the Kraken couldn't control: their will to survive. "We need to make it bleed," Lars muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Svein looked at him, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What? How do you?" But Lars was already moving, grabbing the harpoon gun and aiming it at the Kraken's thick, scaly skin. He knew it was a long shot, but it was the only chance they had. The Kraken's eyes glared at them, its massive, glistening pupils narrowing as it sensed the threat. It whipped its tentacles faster, pulling the boat further into the water, as if daring them to fight back. Lars aimed the harpoon again, his fingers trembling, and fired. The projectile sank deep into one of the Kraken's limbs, and the creature screamed in agony, thrashing wildly. The boat lurched again, nearly capsizing, but this time, the creature was momentarily distracted. "Get to the engine, now!" Lars shouted. Svein didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted toward the engine, yanking at the starter cord with all his strength. The engine sputtered, stuttered, and finally roared to life. But as soon as they started moving, the Kraken lunged again, its massive tentacles chasing them through the water. Lars gritted his teeth. They were running out of time. The boat was damaged, the Kraken was relentless, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Every wave they crashed through seemed to push them closer to the edge. The Kraken's body rose from the water, its enormous form blocking their path. With a roar, it sent another tentacle crashing down onto the boat, splintering the wood and sending Lars tumbling to the floor. The pain was unbearable, but there was no time to stop. They had to keep moving. Svein shouted something, But Lars couldn't hear him over the deafening noise of the storm and the Kraken's growls. He staggered to his feet, his vision blurred, and made his way back to the wheel. They had to escape. They just had to. With every ounce of strength left in him, Lars steered the boat toward the open sea, praying that they would find a way out of this nightmare. The Kraken wasn't just trying to kill them. It was trying to drag them into the depths, to take them with it into the dark, unknown ocean. But Lars and Svein weren't ready to die yet. Not today. They fought the creature with every ounce of strength they had left, determined to survive, to make it back home. It was a battle they would never forget. The end of part 1.